Hey guys, Bicebump here, bringing you the state of Frost on the Shadowlands Beta. Similarly to the article and video I made on Unholy, I'm making an article for Wowhead on Frost and also making a video here today. So for everyone that wants a little bit more flavour and who would rather watch a video than read an article. Today we'll take a look at all the changes that will happen to Frost when we move from pre-patch to the Shadowlands. This includes stuff like leveling up abilities and losing Azurite and essences. We'll also look at all the different Covenant abilities, as well as what Covenant will be best for the Frost DK. We'll also consider Conduits, Soulbinds, Legendaries, and finish up with some Playstyle Issues. To start off, let's look at the level up abilities we gain as a Frost DK. At level 52, we get Obliterate rank 2. This provides a 20% buff to Obliterate. It's a very nice buff to us. Obliterate has been nerfed multiple times throughout the beta cycle, so getting an extra 20% will make up for a portion of that nerf. Furthermore, it helps a lot with builds that rely heavily on Obliterate damage, such as Obliteration, and therefore also two-handed builds, which also rely heavily on Obliterate damage. At level 54, we get Sacrificial Pact. This is an active ability we can use to blow up the ghoul that we summon through Raise Dead. It also provides a heal and deals AoE damage. On pure single target, we're going to want to use this ability right at the end of our ghoul's lifespan in order to maximize both the damage we get from the Raise Ghoul ability as well as the damage we get from Sacrificial Pact. We can use it early in emergency situations where we want to leverage the heal to survive, but generally you should try and time it at the end of your race dead. In AoE, the usage is slightly different. The ability scales up to 8 targets, that's the target cap. So if you have a couple mobs coming in, if you have a couple adds, you might want to use this ability early in order to maximize that AoE damage. At level 56, we gain Empower Rune Weapon rank 2. This provides a 15 seconds cooldown reduction, which makes the ability a 1 minute 45 seconds cooldown. This is really quite odd, and it doesn't really give us anything. We have Pillar of Frost, which is on a 1 minute cooldown, and we have Breath of Cindergosa at 2 minutes. So everything kind of aligns every 2 minutes. So even though we get a 15 second shorter cooldown, we're probably just going to hold this ability for whenever we can line it up with our major cooldowns. At level 58, we get Killing Machine rank 2, and this right here is the most significant level up ability out of all of the ones available to us. It makes it so that when you consume a Killing Machine proc on Obliterate, it deals frost damage. And now this is very important for two reasons. One, frost damage is not reduced by armor like regular physical damage is. Furthermore, frost damage increased by our mastery. If you combine these two, it makes it so that crits that consume Killing Machine deal roughly twice the damage as normal crits. Twice the damage, that's a lot of extra damage. This essentially makes it so that Obliteration becomes a viable talent again. It is on par with Breath of Cindergosa on pure single target. Furthermore, it makes it so that two-handed Frost becomes much more viable, since two-handed Frost generally runs Obliteration, and Obliteration is viable. If you look at the current numbers, Obliteration with dual wield is something like 1% behind Breath of Cindergosa. Obliteration with two-hander is roughly 4%. It's all really quite close, which is very nice. It gives some talent diversity and the option for people that want to play a different build than Breath of Cindergosa to do so without having a large negative effect on their output. We will lose both Azurite essences as well as Azurite traits as we enter the Shadowlands. When it comes to Azurite essences, the only significant one when it comes to gameplay is Memory of Lucid Dreams. It provided quite a lot of resources in our rotation, which meant that, for instance, Breath of Cindergosa builds could hold on their breaths a bit longer. So losing Memory of Lucid Dreams would nerf the breath duration slightly. We will get other things that will help with breath duration, but that's the most significant effect when it comes to essences. When we consider asteroid traits, the absolutely most significant part of it has to do with Icecap. Icecap inherits a lot of value from asteroid traits. It's more than half or whatever you gain from picking that talent that actually comes through the empowerment of asteroid traits. We have Icy Citadel and we've got Frostwell's Indignation. Losing those two would essentially kill Icecap. It is no longer viable, even though it's 4 seconds. That's not enough. We lose Asteroid, we also lose Icecap. Let's take a look at all the different Covenant abilities. And first of all, let's consider Kyrian, which gives us Shackle the Unworthy. This is a hasted dot. Hasted means that the dot rate increases with haste, which means that damage scales with haste. It lasts for 14 seconds. Using abilities, direct abilities that consume Rune, such as Obliterate or Howling Blast main target or Frost Scythe main target, has a 50% chance of spreading the dot. Unlike Unholy, which can pop down Deafening K and cleave Scorch Strike to spread the dot for multiple targets, Frost doesn't have that possibility, so we're stuck with simply spreading it off the main target, and therefore it doesn't really scale well at all in AoE. It does deal the most damage out of all the Covenant abilities, so it's still a very solid single target choice. The Conduit connected to Shackle the Unworthy is called Proliferation, increases damage by 20%, increases duration by 3 seconds. The duration increase is quite nice. It allows us, it's more time to essentially spread the dot, but since spreading the dot isn't that great anyway, this is not that good of a Conduit. The signature ability is called Summon Steward. This summons a guy that gives us a Phial of Serenity. This is a potion which both heals us and cleanses a large number of different debuffs. It's a nice addition to survivability. It allows us to get that extra health potion in a fight, allows us to dodge some mechanics which can reduce our damage intake. Next up is the Necrolord Covenant with the Abomination Limb. This is a 2-minute AoE cooldown, which has the added benefit of actually pulling targets to you. It seems like they recently fixed that, so it doesn't pull stuff which is out of Covenant with you, which is nice. So it will only pull stuff that's actually in combat, so you don't risk running into a Mythic Plus pack and then just pulling another pack and wiping your team. It's target capped at 5 targets, so it deals full damage up to 5 targets and then 0 damage after that point. Whenever it first hooks the target, you get a Rune proc. This is actually quite nice. In Mythic Plus, you use the ability when you run into a pack, you're probably going to be more than 8 yards around something which is in combat with you, so it's going to be pulled to you and give you a Rune, which is really quite useful. When it comes to damage output, it's fine in AoE, it's fine in single target, but it doesn't really provide the same punch as the other Covenant abilities. Conduit related to Abomination Limb is called Brutal Grasp. This is just a fat damage increase and is quite solid in AoE scenarios. The signature ability we get is called Fleshcraft. This is a shield that you need to channel to gain. It's quite nice when you have a bit of downtime before you can engage a pack such as Mythic Plus, but in most scenarios you won't really want to stand still for 4 seconds to gain a shield when you can do other stuff like dealing damage. So okay, but it doesn't have that many use cases really. Now next up is Night Fae that brings the Death's Due class ability. This replaces your Death and Decay. It keeps everything that's related to Death and Decay, which is just damage and AoE, and then it adds 3 distinct additions. The first one is that whenever you deal damage to a target with Obliterate when standing in your Death's Due, that target will deal 1% less damage to you, stacking up to 8 times. Furthermore, you also gain 1 strength for every target you hit with Obliterate, stacking up to 8 times. Finally, the most important bit, it makes Obliterate cleave to 1 additional target. This has great synergy with Obliteration because you can empower your Obliterates heavily with the Killing Machine procs. Essentially, you will pop down your Pillar of Frost, pop down Death and Decay, and then weave Obliterates which are empowered by Killing Machine. Since those Obliterates deal heavy damage, this is going to be excellent damage in cleave scenarios. The Conduit ability we gain here is called Withering Ground. This is extra damage to your Death's Due ability. It's not very significant. It's not like it dealt much damage before, so the extra damage won't be that great. Finally, we have the signature ability. It's called Soul Shape for Night Fae. This is such a great ability. You press it, it teleports you forward and gives you a 50% movement speed increase. It also allows you to teleport multiple times in its 12-second duration. It's just such a great addition to our lacking mobility. I love this ability. I think it's very useful for us. It's great. Just a note, if you use any abilities when you're in the soul shape, it will take you out of it. It was previously in the beta that you could use lots of stuff, but that's no longer the case. So it's very much similar to a travel form for a druid. The final covenant we're looking at here is called Venter, and the ability you get is called Swarming Mist. So this is an AoE that increases your survivability slightly with a 10% dot chance increase, as well as increasing your runic power generation. Swarming Mist gives you 3 runic power every time it deals damage, up to a 15 amount maximum per tick. This means that if you're fighting a single target, it gives you 3 runic power per tick and 27 total. If you're fighting 3 targets, you get 9 runic power per tick times 9 ticks, which gives you 81 runic power total. At the maximum amount, 5 targets, you get the 15 runic power. It gives you 135 runic power total. You might realize that that is a lot of runic power. This synergizes heavily with Breath of Sindragosa builds. In AoE scenarios, if you almost done with your Breath of Sindragosa, your runic power is down to 20 or something. If you pop this ability, like, it will take your runic power up to full in its duration. It is so very powerful. You can also probably make use of it in single target situations, because there are lots of instances when you have ads coming in. You can then use this when the ads come in to gain and leverage that additional runic power you get from the additional targets. The conduit related to this covenant class ability is called Impenetrable Gloom. This is a small increase in dot chance, as well as a buff to the ability itself. It's a solid conduit for AoE, because this class ability is actually uncapped in AoE. It deals damage up to 20 targets, but it's probably not going to be as useful as our other conduits, even then. The signature spell is called the Door of Shadows. This is a 1.5 second channel which teleports you to a chosen location. This is very useful to us. As you will know, we lack a lot of mobility. Even though it's a channel teleport, it's still a teleport, and it's going to be useful in plenty of different scenarios. Alright, now let's talk about the Covenant choice. This is a very important choice you have to make at the start of your Shadowlands journey, so it's important that you make a well-educated decision. I do support everyone that simply wants to choose a Covenant because they like a Covenant, possibly because of cosmetic reasons, possibly because of lore reasons. I don't care. Just make sure you pick whatever you actually want to play. I'm going to recommend a different Covenant based on the build you choose to run. First of all, if you look at Obliteration, for instance, if you're running two-handed Obliteration build, I would recommend picking up Curian. It has Shackle of the Unworthy, which is the best single target ability, and it has a very good Soulbind when it comes to Pelagos, which synergizes very well with our 1 minute cooldown damage windows. It's going to be the best pick for single target, and single target is usually what matters, and which is why I recommend this. For Breath of Sindragosa, I would recommend picking up Venter, and this is mainly because Swarming Mist synergizes so extremely well with Breath of Sindragosa. There are way too many instances when you can leverage the runic power gain to empower your Breath of Sindragosa window, and I think it's just going to be very, very good in the majority of cases. The Soulbinds are also decent. You pick up some nice damage abilities early, which is also a important factor. Now let's look at conduits. There are 4 frost-specific potency conduits. There are 4 of the Covenant ones. I won't talk about the Covenant ones now because I covered those in the Covenant ability section, and I don't think any of those will be able to compete with our own potency conduits. We have Everfrost. This is the best potency conduit by a large margin. It's best in both AoE and single target, so there's really nothing that can beat it. It empowers our Remorseless Winter, which is very nice. It synergizes very well with Gathering Storm, and I think we're going to reach a situation where Everfrost is really good, which means Gathering Storm even better, which means that's going to be the go-to pick because of that. It's already very good, but it's going to become even better. A second pick would be Accelerated Cold. This makes it so that your Empower Rune weapon gives you more haste. It also provides a cooldown reduction, but we don't really care about that. It just makes it desync even more. But the haste is enough to actually make this the second best conduit in all situations. It scales well in both single target and AoE, and just provides the second most amount of damage in all situations. The third potency conduit I would say is Unleashed Frenzy. It makes it so that you gain a strength increase whenever you use a Frost Strike. This is quite good in single target because you're going to be using quite a lot of Frost Strikes. If you run Breath of Syndragosa, it is obviously going to be less because you're going to spend that runic power in your Breath of Syndragosa window, but it's still a decent buff overall. It also scales in AoE somewhat because you do use Frost Strike in specific instances in AoE, and that strength is going to help you deal more AoE damage. Fourth spot in the potency conduit ranking, that's going to be Eradicating Blow. This is the least amount of damage increase on single target, and it just doesn't scale at all in AoE. So it's just overall a pretty lackluster potency conduit. When it comes to finesse and endurance conduits, I have 3 I want to specifically highlight. This is Spirit Drain, Hardened Bones, and Reinforced Shell. Spirit Drains adds a possible damage increase by providing runic power when you interrupt enemies. This obviously can't be used everywhere, but there are lots of instances where interrupts are possible. For instance, in Mythic Plus and a couple of raid encounters. Whenever that happens, I would definitely pick up this finesse in order to increase your damage output. When it comes to endurance conduits, we got Hardened Bones. This makes your Lichborn a much more potent defensive cooldown, and when you pick up a couple of ranks of this, it's going to be a proper defensive, which means that overall you're going to become much more tankier. Finally, we have Reinforced Shell. This makes your anti-magic zone larger by 15% and increases its duration. This just holds lots of utility for any raid or party group. Bigger ANZ makes it easier for everyone to shuffle into it, and a longer one enables you to cover multiple magic damaging abilities, which is just great. Now let's take a look at the Soulbinds of the Covenants I previously recommended. So this is going to be Kyrian when you're running Obliteration, and then Venther for Breath of Syndragosa. To start off, Kyrian, we would choose Pelagos. Pelagos is such an amazing Soulbind. It starts off by getting a mastery increase on a 1 minute cooldown whenever you use the Shackle of the Unworthy trait. This is such good synergy with our Pillar of Frost cooldown. It's going to give mastery, which helps us deal more damage through those frost damaging obliterates. You know, it's just great synergy really. We can then pick up 2 potency traits. This is great for obliteration because obliteration scales quite nicely with potency traits. And then finally, we get an additional spell that provides a damage increase in the form of Let Go of the Past. It's just overall such a nice and diverse Soulbind which provides lots and lots of damage output for us. When it comes to Breath of Syndragosa and Venthyr, I would recommend the Nadia Soulbind. She provides Thrill Seeker as the first spell you get. This is a solid choice which provides a significant amount of damage. You can then pick up at the end of the tree the Exacting Preparation. This works very well with our Rune Forges because Rune Forges are such powerful enchants. Furthermore, generally with Breath of Syndragosa, we have the Everfrost potency, which is really good, and then we kind of have all the other potencies which are quite lackluster. This means that there's not that as much emphasis on picking up 2 potency Soulbinds, which enables us to go with a tree like the one you can see in front of you now. Now let's look at the Legendaries. And when it comes to Legendaries, we have a couple of Legendaries which are general for all classes. I won't cover those here. Don't think any of those will be relevant for a Frost DK. We have 4 Death Knight Legendaries, and then we have 4 Frost Legendaries, all of which we're going to take a look at here. For the Death Knight general ones, we have Death's Embrace, Grip of the Everlasting, Pheromones, and Super Strain. Death's Embrace, that's purely defensive, not very relevant. Grip of the Everlasting, that's purely utility, also not very relevant. Pheromones though, is quite nice. It makes it so that you get a significant haste increase whenever you pop down your Death and Decay. It works for all the Death Knight specs, which is very nice. So if you want to pick up something that's, you can use in all your off specs, this is a good choice. We also have Super Strain. This is very similar to Pheromones, where it works nicely for all the specs. Frost itself doesn't gain too much from it. Virulent Plague doesn't add anything extra, whereas Blood Plague and Frost Fever do. Blood Plague is going to be quite nice to get a bit of healing, but yeah, it's a bit shame that we don't get an extra amount of runing power from Frost Fever, such as Blood or Honuli would get from this legendary. It's still a solo pick in AoE, and I would recommend picking that up if you don't want to run with Pheromones, and if you're looking to play a lot of off specs. When it comes to Frost-specific legendaries, we have Absolute Zero, Biting Cold, Coltira's Favor, and Rage of the Frozen Champion. Absolute Cold, this is inspired by a Legion legendary. It makes it so that the cooldown of your Frostworm's Fury is reduced by 50%. It also gains a 3-second stun. So this can be great for PvE if there are ads coming in every 90 seconds. But that's pretty much the only scenario where this is going to be really useful. Simply doesn't provide enough damage output to be a good legendary pickup for us. We then have Biting Cold. It increases the damage of your Remorseless Winter and makes it so that you get Rime whenever Remorseless Winter hits 3 or more targets. It's very similar to the Frozen Tempest Asteroid trait from BFA. This is a great AoE legendary. The free Rime is so useful when you want to engage a pack. You can just run in Remorseless Winter and get it straight off the bat, instead of having to hard cast a naked Howling Blast, for instance. It's the best throughput legendary for AoE, and I would recommend running it in Mythic Plus when you want to focus heavily on that AoE damage. Thirdly, we have Coltira's Favor. This is also inspired by a legendary from Legion. It makes it so that your Obliterate deal more damage and gives you a chance to refund runes whenever you use Obliterates. This synergizes very well with both Obliteration as well as Breath of Sindragosa. It's good for Obliteration because it increases Obliterate damage, which Obliteration loves. It also benefits quite nicely from the extra runes. When it comes to Breath of Sindragosa, the extra runes, it's so nice. It allows you to extend your breath window quite significantly, and the extra damage to Obliterate is also good. Coltira is the best single target throughput legendary for both builds, and I would recommend picking this up as your first legendary. Finally, we have Rage of the Frozen Champion. This is very similar to a tier set in Legion in Nighthold. It makes it so that when you use your Howling Blast on Rime procs, you get a little bit of runic power. Specifically good for Breath of Sindragosa, which loves that extra runic power to extend its breath windows. However, it's not as powerful as Coltira's, but still very good. Also scales quite nicely in AoE scenarios because you can get a bit more rhymes with your Obliterates in your Breath of Sindragosa window, which is going to be quite nice AoE damage. However, I wouldn't say that it's as good as Coltira's because, it doesn't bring as much single target, and the AoE you get isn't as good as, for instance, Biting Cold. So that was everything I wanted to cover about the new systems in Shadowlands. Let's discuss some playstyle issues I have, and they're not that many really. I'm very happy at the moment with the state of Frost. It could be tuned a bit higher, but I'm sure that will happen later. There's so many different builds, there's so much variety, so much talent choice. I really like it. first topic I want to bring up is two-handed versus dual-wield balancing. So this is a difficult one, because a lot of people will come into Shadowlands and they will want to play two-hander, and then they're going to be disappointed because two-hander really doesn't scale well in AoE scenarios. There's a natural gap between two-hander and dual-wield because dual-wield gets 2 rune forges, and that natural gap exists both in single target and in AoE. Now, we got Might of Frozen Wastes. This makes Obliterate deal more damage and you get more Killing Machine procs. This helps two-hander in single target. As I previously mentioned, two-handed Obliteration, that's only 4% behind, is really quite close. However, the issue arises when you move into AoE scenarios. The increased Obliterate damage only scales in single target. So whenever you start adding more targets, dual wield will just widen and widen the gap. I think it would be great if Might of the Frozen Wastes also applied to some degree on Frost Scythe. It would help two-handed builds scale in AoE as well, and not make it so that it's an obvious pick to run dual wield as soon as there are multiple targets, right? It doesn't have to be 30% extra damage, it could be 20%, it could be something. But I do think that two-handed builds need something extra to help them scale in AoE. My second topic has to do with Empower Rune Weapon, and the fact that it's just completely desynced by additional systems that come with Shadowlands. We have the rank 2 we get, which adds 15 seconds off the cooldown, makes it 1 minute 45. We have the accelerated cold conduit, takes another 10% off, makes it 1 minute 30-ish seconds cooldown. It's just a bit odd, because you know, all that other cooldowns are based on a 1 or 2 minute duration, right? It just makes it an Empower Rune Weapon just get desynced, which is just not very nice. I think what happened was that, you know, previously Pillar of Frost was 45 seconds cooldown. You could then get a situation where every second Pillar of Frost you could use Empower Rune Weapon, which would be nice synergy and would be extra value gained from the accelerated cold trait. Currently, you know, that's just not the case. We're probably gonna either use Empower Rune Weapon on cooldown without synergizing with any of our other cooldowns, or we're gonna hold it for 30 seconds to use it with, for instance, Breath of Synagosa or Pillar of Frost. I think it would be nice if they just remove these cooldown reduction effects and added something else interesting, like a frost damage increase or just a flat damage increase. Whatever really, because currently they just don't serve a purpose. Finally, the Withering of Icecap. You know, in BFA, Icecap started out very weak, it got buffed significantly, and it saw lots of play in the final patch. It's quite nice to get a talent diversity where you could run Breath of Synagosa in some situations and Icecap in others. With loss of Azerite, Icecap is completely dead, and I think that's a bit unfortunate. I would love it if they could do something like adding the Frostwealth Indignation effect to Icecap, which would mean that every time you use Pillar of Frost, you will get a little Frost Dragon that dealt damage and gave you mastery. I feel like a lot of people really like that trait. I think a lot of people liked to run the Icecap build in Mythic Plus, and this would kind of give a possibility of doing so without gimping yourself when it comes to damage output. Now, what are the conclusions? So I'm really excited about Frost moving into Shadowlands. You know, there are lots and lots of interesting things to consider. There are lots of different play styles, lots of different talent choices. It's just, I think it all kind of comes through together quite well, and there's something for everyone when it comes to the Frost DK. Frost will excel very nicely in Cleave. We have Breath of Synagosa, which is an obvious Cleave talent, but we can also now pick up, for instance, Night Fae Covenant and run an Obliteration build to get very, very good 2-target Cleave. We also will excel in AoE burst because we've got the Frostwind's Fury talent baseline, which is going to be very useful. Our weaknesses will still be long single target fights where we can't leverage our Cleave abilities, as well as high mobility. However, we now have Covenants where we can pick up movement abilities, which is going to help us a lot in forms of Venthyr and Night Fae. You know, I think you all are very excited about Shadowlands. I do hope You play whatever you want. Play two-hander if you fancy, play dual wield if you fancy, pick up Obliteration or Prophet Synagosa. It's going to be fun to try out the different builds, see what works best in what situation, and what plays the best and what feels the best to play. When it comes to Covenants, again, I want to reiterate, choose whatever you think is cool, whatever feels good to play. Don't be too focused on damage output. We're not playing this game to have a boring class which deals lots of damage, right? Do leave a comment below if you have any questions or anything to say. Do consider leaving an up like or a down like, whatever you thought about this video, please represent that in that way. Do subscribe if you want to see more content. I plan to keep putting out these videos as much as possible, especially now with the Shadowlands launch. There's going to be lots and lots of guide videos. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more content. Thank you.